Alex Merklinger's Mysteries of the Mind.
Buddy, good evening. Welcome to our show tonight. Yes, it is I, this sweet, lovable guy you all listen to every night, still with this cold right in my head, in my nose anyway, and my chest. But other than that, hey, we are doing grand. Except my poor little wife, she not only has it in her head, her sinuses, and her chest, but we're doing a lot better. So thanks very much for all of your help and support. Seriously. Tonight, as you know, we are going to run a rerun of the first interview I had with Noreen Gosch, the mother of Johnny Gosch, and the author of the book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home. That book was the first true exposure I had to the scope of this unbelievable topic of child abduction, pedophilia, child slavery. I'm not even sure all the different names and the different avenues. I did find it very interesting, is on the news tonight, that France has broken up the largest pedophile ring in their history, and the people are totally aghast at what is going on. We do know that this, and I'm sure it's not even the same group, because it's happening all over the world. I can't even believe it. How can stuff like this happen? Where are people coming from? Are we this demented as a race to take our children, our babies, and sell them as sex objects, to destroy their minds, their bodies, their souls? I can't answer that. This is where we need so much help. And I'm sending this stuff out, everybody, because I have to be honest with you. I don't know what to do about it. As I said before, we are not going to let it die. We cannot. It's something that is so pervasive in the world today. All races, all creeds, all different children, that I'm not sure what to do. But we have to do something. We have to keep it before the public. The public has to know what is going on. How sad, huh? I'd like to, Noreen did just, maybe I better wait, okay? Because we're trying to do something together, and I want to get some more people on the show in the coming weeks ahead. But I want to thank all of you for your support and your feelings as to what is happening, because it's so very important. I'm so serious about this. You are going to hear the show with Noreen Gosch, and what I would like to have is your feedback on it. And remember, we are using the interview, and this was the first interview I did with Noreen. It's from June 17th of last year. And then I had one just a week later, and we had another interview with Ted Gunderson, because Ted worked on the Johnny Gosch case, and another man by the name of Rothstein, who was a private detective, who was also helping Noreen. And we have some other people who now we also want to get on. So what I would like to do is get right into the interview with Noreen Gosch. And I will pick it up at the end of the interview. So stay where you are. I'm Alex Merklinger, and this is Mysteries of the Mind on the Millennium Radio Network. God bless everybody. Here's the interview with Noreen. We have such a special show, and it truly is one of the most important I think I've ever done. I would first of all like to bring on our very special guest, Noreen Gosch. Noreen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Well, and we sure appreciate you and I guess what it takes to share a story such as this. Because your voice is so soft, would you try to speak up like you're hollering at me?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Is that better?
That's a lot better, yeah.
Okay.
Noreen, how do you start talking about a situation like you, your family, and especially your son Johnny has gone through? I mean, you start out, and 1982, okay, so that's what, 22 years ago?
It'll be 21 years.
21 years.
Mm-hmm.
As, I guess, a normal family, right?
It was, yes. Yes, we were just pretty much living life, working, doing things with our kids, and the kids were doing well in school and belonging to different activities.
Sure.
And like normal. And then a bomb blew our world apart.
Unbelievable. Before I guess get into a lot of the questions, Noreen, tell us kind of what led up and then what happened and some of the things that you have gone through over, especially in the beginning years when.
Okay.
Because I had just read this one part of it, and I find something very interesting, and I'm sure you do too, was that for so many weeks in a row at 1:35 in the morning, you get a phone call.
That was correct.
And then your husband at that time said, you have the wrong number, you have the wrong number, and on and on. Mm-hmm. And then finally he said, okay, all right, and hung up and told you it was a wrong number. Now, as soon as I heard that, obviously the red flags go up. Mm-hmm. Do you want to address that now or later on?
It would come very early on in the explanation of what happened.
Okay.
So, if I can start with the Friday night before Johnny was kidnapped.
Right.
Our family attended a high school football game where our older son was playing. And Johnny asked if he could go down to the concession stand and get some popcorn or something. Mm. And it was within our eyesight. So we said, okay, and he climbed down the bleachers and walked over to the concession stand, got his treat, and was standing there watching his brother play. And I glanced over, and Johnny wasn't there. So my husband at that time went down to find him. Mm-hmm. Here he was underneath the bleachers. There was a West Des Moines police officer underneath the bleachers talking to him.
Yeah.
And so Johnny's father said, come on over here and come back up with us.
Without walking over to the cop or asking what the cop was doing? No, he just
called Johnny away from him.
Okay.
And they came back up to the bleachers. And then as we were leaving after the game was over, this is a very important part of the story. That's why I'm bringing it up first.
Yeah.
As we were leaving the stadium, that cop was standing right by the railing where people were passing by.
Right.
And Johnny looked at him and said to me, that's the guy I was talking to underneath the bleachers. He says, I might want to be a policeman when I grow up. Nothing more was said. That was the end of it. We went home. And
Johnny was 13 at that time, right?
He was 12, and his 13th birthday was in 2 months.
Okay. All right.
We went home. The next day was Saturday. It was just an average day. And I remember that our daughter came home from college with her fiancé. My older son was home, and I made a very nice dinner, which I now call the Last Supper.
Right.
And I was clearing up the dishes, and Johnny said, I got to get to bed because I got to get up early in the morning and do our paper route so that we can go out to the lake tomorrow. We had a boat, and he was going to be allowed to bring a friend along. So he was really excited. And then he said to his dad, would it be okay if I did the paper route alone tomorrow? Because in the past, either myself or my husband were always with him.
Right.
He never, ever once went alone. And my husband looked at him and said, well, I guess that would be all right. And And I piped up right away and I said, no, that's not the agreement we have. He's younger than his brother was when he had that route, because my older son had that route.
Yeah.
And it was just a neighborhood route, only 28 papers to deliver, right within a 2-block radius of our home. I said, at Johnny's age, he's not going to be out at that time of the night or morning without one of us with him. So, at that point, his dad said, no, wake me up in the morning and I'll go with you. Johnny turned, gave me a hug goodnight, and went up the stairs to go to bed. I went over to the counter by the dishwasher, and I turned around, and there he was again. He'd come back downstairs, and he wrapped his arms around me, and he says, Mom, I really love you. You're the best. And he turned and walked over by the steps, and then went upstairs to bed. And that was the last time I ever saw my son.
Was he prone to affection like that, Noreen?
Yes.
Okay.
He was just a wonderful young boy. He really was. Very funny and lively. You knew he was in the house because he was not an invisible child. You know, sometimes there are kids that are so quiet you don't even know they're around. With him, you knew he was around, and he was always, you know, cracking jokes, and he was very generous to other people. If he had a pack of gum, he would give away every slice. And then look down at the pack and realize he didn't have any left for himself.
Yeah.
He was a very unselfish child. And so that was Saturday night. The next morning, I was awakened by the phone ringing. This is September 5th now, and it did happen to be Labor Day weekend. I was awakened by the phone ringing, and it was a neighbor saying that they didn't get their newspaper, and where was Johnny?
Now this
Why hadn't he brought them?
This was after your husband.
I looked at the clock, and it was a few minutes after 7.
Okay, this was after your husband received that strange phone call.
Yes, thank you for reminding me.
Yeah.
We received a phone call at 1:30 in the morning, and it was always on a Saturday night or early Sunday morning.
Right.
And for weeks we had been getting those calls precisely at that time. And the phone was on my husband's side of the bedroom, and so he always answered and would say it was a wrong number.
Sure.
Well, that particular morning, when he answered the phone, I heard him say, yeah, okay, all right. And then he hung up. And I said, what was that? Because I woke up too. And he said it was just a wrong number. And I remember saying, well, you don't have a conversation with the wrong number.
Yeah, right.
And then I just went back to sleep because it was in the middle of the night. Then at 7 o'clock, shortly thereafter, I was awakened by the phone ringing, and it was the neighbor saying that they didn't get their paper. So I jumped out of bed and I ran down to Johnny's room, and it was empty. And I thought, well, he's probably out on the route, but perhaps just running a little bit late.
Yeah.
So Johnny's father said, I'll go help him. Why don't you start breakfast, and then we can get an early start to the lake right afterwards. So he went to help Johnny on the route.
But he never got up in the early morning to go with him.
No, he didn't.
All right.
And Johnny normally would come into our room and wake up his dad, and then the two of them would go on the route together.
Right.
And then when they would get home, we'd have a little breakfast and then take our boat out to the lake if the weather was good. That morning he did not come in and wake up his dad. And I went down to the kitchen to start coffee, and just then the door burst open, and it was Johnny's father, and his face was just as white as a sheet, and he came in and he said, Johnny's gone. Call the police right away. His wagon is sitting up at the corner, full of newspapers. The bundle has not even been cut because they put a hard plastic thing around the papers.
Sure.
And there were no signs of a struggle. Normally the kids would carry rubber bands in their pack to wrap the papers with. There weren't any rubber bands, anything on the ground. There was just the wagon full of papers. So I called the police while his father went back out to deliver the papers to all the neighbors, because by now the phone was ringing off the wall. Nobody got their paper.
Yeah.
Which, again, was very unusual because Johnny, in the 13 months that he had had the route, never had a late paper, not once. he was quite a little businessman, and he realized that a late paper cost you money because they would fine the boys
Sure.
if they had late papers. So he always made sure his were on time. I couldn't believe what was about to happen next. It took 45 minutes for the police to even arrive at our home, and we lived 10 blocks from the police department.
Jeez.
While I was waiting for the police to get there, I called the district manager of the newspaper
Right.
that was in charge of Johnny's route area. And I got the names of all the other kids that would also be at the paper drop.
Mm-hmm.
And the paper drop was about a block away, and that's where the company would drop all the newspapers. The kids would come and pick them up, fold them, and make the deliveries.
Right.
By the time the police arrived, I had already called and spoken to all the boys that were at the corner that morning, picking up their papers. The only one that I did not have a chance to talk to was the 44-year-old attorney who was there at the corner picking up his son's papers. When the police finally arrived, I explained all of this, what happened with Johnny, that we got the phone calls, he hadn't delivered his papers.
Yeah.
And then I related to the police what each one of the witnesses had told me, that as Johnny was walking towards the corner, pulling his wagon, with our little dog riding in the wagon, a man pulled up in a car and approached Johnny and asked for directions. And it was a blue over blue car, light blue over dark blue.
Right.
And it resembled a Mercury Zephyr at that time, in 1981 or 1982 model. The man then made a U-turn in the street and took off, came back around, and what we imagined happened was that he went completely around the block.
Mm-hmm.
By the time Johnny got up to the corner, the man had pulled his car in, shut off the engine, opened up the passenger door, which was closest to the curb, swung his feet out on the pavement, and began talking to the kids.
To all of them.
He was asking them for directions to 86th Street, and this is according to all the witnesses.
Yeah.
Johnny turned to one of the other kids and said, "There's something weird about this guy. I'm scared. I'm going home right now."
Hmm.
And he had his wagon loaded with papers, and he started down the street, and our little dog, which was a little miniature dachshund, was following him. The man in the car quickly jumped back in the car, turned on the car, pulled the passenger door closed. But before he took off, he flicked the dome light 3 times, on and off. The 44-year-old attorney had gone by now. The other witnesses had gone on their routes.
Yeah.
The only one sitting at the corner folding his papers was a 16-year-old boy. As the man pulled away with his car, he noticed that another man came out from between 2 houses on foot and followed Johnny down the street,
Jeez.
about, a good 10 paces behind him. I doubt very much whether Johnny even realized he was being followed at that point.
Yeah.
The witness, the 16-year-old boy, heard our dog start growling. Then Johnny got as far as the next corner and made a left, and that took him out of the eyesight of the witness, the 16-year-old boy. The next thing he heard was the slamming of a car door, the screech of tires, and then he saw that same blue over blue car run the stop sign and turn left, which was north, and that would take him to the interstate.
Mm-hmm.
That boy that witnessed all of that had no idea that there had just been kidnapping. He had no clue. And it wasn't until I called all of them and told them Johnny was missing, and each one of the witnesses that were at the corner who had seen the man related each part of what they saw. and the total picture came up to a kidnapping. Well, I told the police all of this, every single bit of it, in great detail and very carefully. I had the names and phone numbers of all the boys. The cop looked at me. It was like he didn't hear me. He said, well, has your son ever run away before? And I said, didn't you just hear me? I said, my son did not run away. Someone has taken him. I just gave you the information from all of the witnesses.
Jeez.
The cop said, well, I'll check on this. He took that piece of paper that I had filled out with all the names on it, and he left. We never saw another police officer till 2 in the afternoon. Nobody else came over. I couldn't believe it.
And this was about what time when he was taken?
The police came at probably a little after 8 a.m.
Okay.
And we were frantic at that point. I began calling everybody we knew in the city of Des Moines to begin search parties. Because I knew something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. And we began searching obvious places where you might think a crime would be committed, like a abandoned area, warehousing areas, down by the river, some of the remote areas of the state park that was there. In the afternoon later, as I said, around 2 o'clock, the police came back, and this time they brought a detective who proceeded to want to just ask a lot of questions, which he did, and each time he kept saying, well, he'd ask a question, we would answer it, and he'd say, well, if what you're saying is true. I mean, I was just, it was like being in the middle of a movie.
Yeah, a bad movie.
Watching.
A bad movie.
A bad movie.
Yeah.
And it's the hardest thing to describe to somebody who's never been through it. It's like you're an observer watching and listening to all of this.
Right.
And I kept trying to give the police pictures of Johnny to distribute. Well, they didn't want to take pictures of him. And I was, gathering up all the photographs I had in my house. By then it had been on the police scanners. And members of the press were coming to our home to interview us. So I gave them the photos of Johnny in hopes that they would get it on the air. Then came a big blow. A group of searchers, approximately 20 of them, which had been searching the state park, came back to the house, and they were extremely angry. And the one man who was kind of the spokesperson for this search party said, I thought you people want to help. And I said, well, we do. And he said, well, we're out searching the state park, and up comes the police car. And out of it came the police chief, Orville Cooney, who was drunk, and he stood up on top of a picnic table with a megaphone, one of those bullhorns, and he yelled at the crowd, and he said, all of you people go on home. This kid is nothing but a damn runaway.
Jeez.
That's what he said. Wow. And 20 people came back to my home to tell me. Well, I was just in shock. I got in the car, and I drove up to the police department, and I said, what is going on? Why are you not putting out a bulletin for the description of the car?
Yeah.
Why are you not, and I was just kind of going through what I had learned by watching TV shows about kidnapping. I didn't know how to proceed with a proper investigation, but I thought they surely would.
Well, you would hope so. Yeah.
And then I said, well, what about the FBI? Aren't you going to call them? Well, no, we don't feel we need the FBI.
Okay.
So I went back home, and I called the FBI myself.
Yeah.
They said, well, we'll be over in a couple of days if they don't find the kid. Finally, on the third day, they sent 2 special agents to our home, Ed Mall and David Oxler.
Okay.
They sat at our kitchen table, and they said, we will not be entering the case. And I said,
I thought the FBI...
Why not?
Yeah, I thought the FBI always did in a kidnapping.
That's what I thought. I used to watch F.M. Zimbalist Jr., too. The FBI story.
Yeah.
And I said, why not? And he said, well, the police chief, Orville Cooney, says that he doesn't really need our help. Well, it went like this for days. We would send out search parties. Thousands of people came forward after it was on the news to help us search the obvious areas, and we searched, radius of our home, so many miles, and then remote areas, fields, whatnot. Nothing turned up. Absolutely nothing. So then I asked if we could use the National Guard helicopters, which they do now when there's a missing child. And the governor of Iowa at that time, Governor Robert Ray, who was on his way out because it was an election and he was not going to run again, he said, no, the only way I could allow you to use the National Guard helicopters is if you paid the fee per hour, and that was going to be $800 an hour.
Jeez, my gosh.
We didn't have that kind of money. Not at all. And a radio station, TV station in Omaha, Nebraska, heard on the news that the governor refused to let us use helicopters, and they sent helicopters over.
Really? Well, that's marvelous, yeah.
The police chief refused any canine searches, even though there were volunteer, free, F-R-E-E, canine groups of dogs that could be used. He refused all that help. We're marching now into about the fourth or fifth day after the kidnapping.
Yeah.
And I was driving down the street, and I noticed that there was a sheriff's car following me. I pulled in to a parking lot, and the sheriff's car pulled in too.
Right.
And I thought, good Lord, what now? Well, this man got out of the car, and he came over to me, and he says, ma'am, I just want you to know that I'm the sheriff of Dallas County. That's the county adjacent to ours.
Oh, okay.
And he said, right after your boy was kidnapped, we sent a whole group of men to the police department to help, as did other county sheriffs in all the counties around here. We all sent men to help in the searches. And your police chief told our men to go home, that he did not want the help.
Jeez, my gosh. It seems so obvious, and I don't know what this, the status is at this time, but that the police chief knew it and was involved in it.
Right. And I'm being very specific about names and the things different people said. Well, I learned very quick to start writing everything down, because there'd be no way I'd ever retain it all in a time of trauma. So I carried around this notebook, followed by more notebooks over the years. And when these officials would say these things to me, I would say, now, do you mind if I quote you? And then I would write down the time and exactly what they said. So then I could refer to it later. Well, then, as these days turned into a week and so forth, and there was no news of Johnny, once it was on the news, we had a lot of well-meaning people that were calling in leads and tips. And I would take them up to the police department every day and then ask what was done with the ones before that I brought up, like the day before or the day before that. And they'd say, well, we didn't think that this one was anything. We didn't think that was anything. We didn't think we should follow up on this. And finally I said to the police chief, you keep saying we didn't think. I said, do you ever think?
Oh, jeez.
He didn't like me, and I didn't like him as time went on, because he daily was throwing away my son's life, and I knew it.
Yeah.
I knew it. This was nothing. This was in no way, shape, or form a normal investigation. There was nothing normal about it. And everything about this case smacked of an organized kidnapping, not a lone pedophile operating by himself.
Right.
Then I learned that the one witness, the 44-year-old attorney, felt so bad and so upset that he didn't do something to stop this man. Because he saw the man. He got the license plate number.
Oh, wow.
And was able to give it to the police. And I talked to him, and he said, I gave all this to the police. And this is the thing that's going to blow your mind. Even after all the witnesses, after all of this information that had been given, the police chief put Johnny into the NCIC computer as a runaway.
My gosh.
It took me 4 solid months to get his classification changed in the computer. And that is so critical.
Yeah.
If your child is listed as a runaway in this country, then if you get a lead or a sighting or anything to follow up on, and you have to use law enforcement, the law enforcement in another city will look at that, and when they pull it up on the computer, and if it says runaway, they don't look. They don't follow up on it.
They just let it go.
And they listed Johnny incorrectly again. Why? Well, all these were red flags, one after another. About 2.5 weeks after the kidnapping, there was a small article in the Des Moines Register, that was our local newspaper, stating that 2 young girls, aged 13 and 14, had been kidnapped off the streets of Des Moines, taken to Omaha, Nebraska, which is 2 hours from Des Moines,
right,
and put into a prostitution ring. And the 2 men were caught. They were of Latino descent. I don't know if they were Cuban or Spanish, but this is the way it was described in the paper. Well, I took that article, and the girls were safely back at home. I took that article straight to the police chief, and I said, look what just happened over at Omaha. Would you please call the Omaha police chief? That's only 2 hours away. And if they took these 2 girls from Des Moines and put them in a prostitution ring, and the parents were lucky enough to get them back, maybe they took Johnny too.
Right.
And the police chief said, no, he says, I don't think it's anything, and I don't really have a feel for that, so I'm not going to call that police chief.
Noreen, this whole thing with this police chief, number one,
it was a nightmare.
Do you think he was directly involved?
Yes, I do. And I'll give further information in this interview that'll put the icing on the cake.
Is he still around?
No, he died.
Good.
He died about a year ago.
Good.
His, the police chief in Omaha, Nebraska, his name was Robert Wadman. Now, Robert Wadman's name's going to come up again for your listening audience.
Okay,
several times.
Hold on that, Noreen. I have to take a break for news.
Okay.
So you got about 7 minutes. Relax, sit down, and I'll pick you up right after the news with Finton Dunn. Thanks, Noreen.
Okay.
And everybody, Noreen Gosch is our incredible guest tonight. Stay where you are. We will be right back. I'm Alex Merklinger, and you are listening to Mysteries of the Mind.
I didn't like it at all. However, I was very busy raising 3 kids, working my job, doing those things, and I pretty much ran the household during the week. He would be there on weekends.
Okay, all right.
And that was the type of job that he had. And I guess sometimes when everything is going along and you're just doing, it doesn't jump out at you that there's a huge major something wrong until later.
Yeah.
When something happens, and then 2 and 2 makes 4, or you start to connect things in your mind.
My gosh. Okay, go on with your story.
We were at the point where I had discovered the article in the paper about another kidnapping 2 weeks after Johnny's.
The 2 girls.
And I took that article to the police chief.
Yep.
Asked him to call Omaha to speak with Robert Wadman, who is the police chief in Omaha. He says, I do not have a feel for that. I'm not going to do it. So I went over to the FBI office and asked them. Even though they had not entered the case thus far, I thought this might bring them in.
Yeah.
And they, too, told me they would not. So I called all of the newspaper, TV, and radio stations, and I called my first press conference. I stood up and I told all of them about the article. I told them the response from the police chief and the FBI, and I looked at the cameras and I said, why? Why are they not investigating this when we just had a kidnapping? The police chief was infuriated that I did the press conference. He came over to my home and he began to scream and yell at me.
Jeez.
And I looked at him and I said, there is no need for you to scream and yell. I have perfect hearing. Well, the man went berserk. He completely lost it, turned purple in his face. Now, his reactions to everything were so extreme, it was another red flag.
Oh, yeah.
Then, 3 days after I did the press conference, I received a phone call anonymously, and there was no caller ID back at that time.
Right.
The man said if I didn't stop making waves, I would be dead.
Jeez.
So and then he hung up. After the phone call, I sat there and I thought, okay, what wave did you make? The only wave I had made was calling attention to the kidnapping of those girls, and then it brought to light Omaha, Nebraska. What I did not know in September of 1982, but learned a number of years later when that story broke, was that there definitely was a pornography and prostitution ring using children operating in Nebraska.
Jeez.
And by my bringing attention to the kidnapped girls and demanding some action, I was basically knocking on the back door of what later became the Franklin Credit Union scandal in this country.
Right.
Some of your listeners may be familiar with it. Some might not have even heard of it. But that all didn't break until 1988, when we were still 6 years away from that story breaking. So they went on to do their kidnapping and using of children for a long time. Then in northern Iowa, there was a little boy found dead in a refrigerator. The refrigerator was in a barn, and my cousin was the sheriff there. I got a letter from the parents of that boy saying, and the police right away said that it was suicide, and they shut down the case.
Jeez, my gosh.
The investigating sheriff and the parents told me that, yes, the little boy was found inside the refrigerator. The barn had a dirt floor, and in front of the refrigerator, they could see that somebody had brushed away the footprints. And inside the refrigerator, there were bloody claw marks on the walls of the refrigerator where the boy tried to get out.
Oh, gosh.
Someone put him in there. He did not commit suicide.
Yeah.
And what was later surmised by that and the timing of it, because it was just a few days after Johnny was kidnapped and right about the time that the two girls were taken from Des Moines. This all happened in September of 82. We feel, and we cannot prove this about the second boy, but we do feel that maybe that was a kidnapping attempt that went bad, and they had to get rid of the kid.
Wow.
And that's what the parents and the investigating sheriff's department believed. Now, our state police are the ones that stepped into that case and shut it down and said it was suicide, just like they said Johnny's case was runaway.
The state police were the ones that said Johnny was a runaway, or local?
The local said Johnny was runaway.
Yeah.
The state police said the other boy committed suicide. And the other boy was like 11 years old.
My gosh.
Just a little guy.
Yeah.
So, based on what we learned from the parents and the investigating sheriff's department, which is separate from the state police, we feel that there was foul play, that it was not suicide at all on that case.
Oh, sure.
After I received that death threat, following my bringing attention to Omaha, Nebraska, everything went downhill from there. We were starting to get a lot of national attention on the case, and we were being invited on shows like Good Morning America and lots of other programs that were featuring stories about missing kids. The leads and the calls that would come in after one of those national shows were very valuable to us. So the police weren't doing anything. We knew that. The FBI had not entered the case.
Yeah.
So I felt it was necessary to hire a private investigator.
Now, this is how many years after?
This is within 6 weeks.
Oh, okay, good. Excellent.
Within 6 weeks of the kidnapping.
Yep.
Because we received a phone call to come to the police department at once. This one day. And we bailed over there with our heart in our mouth thinking that they had found a body somewhere. We walked in, and the police chief, Orville Cooney, looked at us and said, well, we're going to have to put this case on the back burner. Things just aren't happening here on the case. And we can't put officers on this and just blow our budget here.
Jeez, unbelievable.
That was why we hired the private investigator.
Yeah.
The first morning on the case, the private investigator was going to try to recreate the timing, the scene, because there seemed to be a question about whether or not the paint color on the car, the kidnapped car, would have changed color under mercury vapor lights, which was what our street lights were. They worked with the one witness that was the best witness and the 44-year-old attorney. And we hired a portrait artist to sit with each one of them separately to draw the composite drawing of the man that was asking the directions and engaging the boys in conversation. We got an excellent composite drawing, and there's a picture of that in my book. That was released to the public, and it was released on all the network shows. And did we ever get information coming in at that point? Every time we did a TV show and or radio program, it just seemed like somebody who had a little bit of information to share, who might have thought it wasn't important at one time, would come forth with it. And it was like putting a giant jigsaw puzzle together. I then was invited to testify before the Justice Department. And what they were doing, the people in charge were gathering parents of missing kids whose cases were badly handled. And we were instructed before videotape to explain exactly what happened on our cases and name names. Who did what, who said what, who wouldn't do their job, who handled things inappropriately. All of this material was presented before the Justice Department, as I mentioned. I was one of the last speakers brought up. Towards the end of my talk, I said, if the FBI is not going to look for missing children, then cut their funding by that amount and redirect that money for a missing children center. Well, you could have heard a pin drop in that place. John Walsh was there, and we became good friends.
Yeah.
But this was way before he became a TV star. He was a grieving parent like the rest of us at that time. He came running over to me, and he kind of grabbed the sides of his head, and he said, "Do you know what you just said? Do you know where you are?" I said, "Of course I do, John. That's why I said it.
Yeah.
This is all being recorded, and this is for the Justice Department."
Yep.
He said, "But telling them to cut the funding for the FBI?" He said, "Who do you think you are?" I said, "John, might I remind you, they did not look for your little boy either.
Jeez.
The FBI did not enter the case. And somebody cut his head off, and that's all you ever found."
Oh, jeez.
I said, "Do I have to remind you of that?" I said, "I did not suggest that they cut all funding for the FBI. I said just cut a portion of it
Yeah.
and direct that money to a missing children's center." Well, my testimony was pretty bold because I didn't hold back anything. I named names and then some. Well, just a short time after that hearing, they directed the first $10 million to start the National Center for Missing Children.
Fantastic.
And in 1983, I was invited to the White House where President Reagan did the dedication. Following that, Dave Bell Associates, which was a film production company, who did films for HBO, called, and they wanted to do a film about Johnny, and they were calling this Missing, and they were going to feature a couple of other families who had lost children to kidnapping as well. They came to Des Moines, they filmed, and it was aired in the country many times on HBO. There again, just keeping the story alive meant so much.
Sure.
We were getting more leads than we could handle through our private investigator. And it became a real critical condition about how we were going to pay for the private investigators. They cost money. They really only make not much more than a plumber per hour, but you have to pay their expenses too.
Right.
So we began selling world's finest chocolate candy bars. And I think probably a lot of people can relate to this because maybe their kids sold these candy bars as a fundraiser for an athletic team or something like that. They put Johnny's picture on the candy bar wrapper, and we sold them for $1 a piece, and we got 50 cents profit.
That's neat.
We sold 450,000 candy bars.
Oh my gosh, jeez.
That money was used to pay detectives and foot the bills for all of this investigation.
Yeah.
It was huge. It was daunting to think of trying to come up with the money every week to keep these detectives going. We started getting leads so far away in the country that travel became quite an issue in terms of paying for it. And I was constantly in touch with my two senators from Iowa, Senator Grassley and Senator Harkin. And I learned that if you make a request through the FBI, or for the FBI to do something, if you request it through your senator, the senator would then send a message over to the FBI office in Washington. The FBI office then sends a message to the local FBI in your town or closest to your town, and then they have to go out and follow up on it. They then have to write a report, which goes back to Washington, which then goes to your senator, and your senator sends it to you. So that's what I began doing.
Wow.
When we had leads that had to be checked out, and we couldn't physically get our private investigators there due to money, that's what I did.
Jeez.
One day, the head of the FBI, with his briefcase and another man with him, they always traveled in pairs, came to my office where I work. Came in, and the head of the FBI said, and this was for a regional area, he said, "You think you're pretty smart, don't you?"
This is how he started the conversation? This is how he started the conversation?
Yes, he did. I said, "Pardon me?" He said, "You think you're pretty smart. You've been requesting through the senator to check things out on your son's case. And then you know we have to follow up and send a written report." And he says, "I presume you've got a stack of them by now." And I looked at him and I said, "What would you do if it was your child and the police chief was not doing his job and the FBI turned their back on it and said they wouldn't enter the case because the FBI said the police didn't want them?"
Yeah.
I said, "What would you do?" I said, "I imagine you get to tuck your kids in at night, don't you? And that makes you feel real good." And then I looked at him and I said, "I have a question for you. Within the FBI, you probably have people that graduate at the top of the class, somewhere in the middle, and at the bottom." Now I said, "What do they do? How do they send people out to the areas of need?" And he says, "Well, the ones that graduate at the top of the class go to the high crime areas.
Yeah.
And others go to areas where there is less crime."
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, like Des Moines, Iowa, like Leave It to Beaver country, huh?" He slammed his briefcase down and he got up and he walked out.
And that was it? He never said a word?
Never said another word.
Hey, he dug his own hole.
Well, what was happening, and it became very clear, is, and this, I'll get to this too as we go on because the story is unfolding on a timeline, and it's helpful for people listening to know that this timeline is moving along here. However, it became very apparent to me that the police and the FBI both wanted me to just forget about this whole thing and let it blow over, because then the pedophiles that were using these kids and the people they were protecting would never be at risk of being exposed. And nothing became more blatant than another day following this FBI explosion in my office. Two of them came back to my office about a week later, and they stood in front of my desk and they said, "We have a suggestion that might help. We think that if you would decide to just maybe have another baby and forget about Johnny, forget about this whole thing, that you'll be kept busy and it'll fill your life again."
What?
My boss was in his office, but they didn't know that because it was around the corner.
Oh, my God.
He came flying out of his office, and he said, "Get out. Get out and do not ever come back to this office again. I cannot believe that you said something this unkind to this woman." And for once in my life, that was the only time I was speechless.
Yeah.
And he took over.
Wow.
And my boss threw them out of the office. Now, all of these things that I'm telling you are exactly the way they happened. And to me, it was just absolutely unbelievable that a little boy could be ripped off the street while doing something as all-American as delivering a paper, and the police and the FBI would not help. It was inconceivable.
Totally. I mean, it is now for me, yeah.
In bordering on against the law. I got utmost help from my senators. The FBI never conducted interviews, because they didn't enter the case, of any of the neighbors in a radius of our home. That was critical. We did. We paid detectives. We had 5 detectives working right in the beginning, doing all the interviews of all the families who might have been up at that hour of the morning, that might have heard or seen anything. And bingo, one man a few blocks away saw a van parked against the traffic flow on the street with his motor running. The man had gone to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. He'd gotten up early.
Yeah.
Heard a motor running and looked out and thought it was odd that this van was parked out there.
Yeah.
And then he saw a blue car pull up, and he saw them lift something wrapped in a blanket from one car to the van, and saw both vehicles take off. That was my son that they transferred.
Gosh.
That man had no idea that it was a kidnapping. Had no idea.
Yeah.
Later, a number of years later, when someone came forward and confessed on the case, is when all of these facts that we had gathered became confirmed. That bit of information that we got by doing the interviews, we did not ever share with anyone. The police department were not privy to it, nor the press, no one. It went in a file, and the file was closed. Because if someone ever came forward at a later time in place, in time, and confessed or had any information that would confirm it, we would know that person was telling the truth. But that would be impossible if it had been public knowledge.
Yeah, okay.
So we kept that quiet. Meanwhile, Senator Harkin, Tom Harkin, was just outraged that the FBI never entered the case and that they never conducted any interviews. Well, 2 years later, 1984, the FBI was ordered to come in and do all the interviews at all the homes.
2 hours later.
2 years later. And in fact, they told some of the neighbors that the only reason they were doing the interviews now is because they were ordered to through the senator's office, because that blankety blank woman wouldn't keep her mouth shut. And that was me. And 2 years later, people's memories don't work as well. Little details are forgotten.
Yep.
Our men were out there doing the interviews within the first couple weeks. That's why we got the cream of the crop as far as information.
Yeah, right.
That the FBI didn't get. Little details were missed. That brings us up to 1984. Between 1983 and 84, after the Missing Children's Center was opened, I wrote legislation for the state of Iowa. Legislation that forces the police department to begin an active investigation for a missing child immediately. It was called the Johnny Gosch Bill.
Good.
It passed into law, was signed in by the governor July 1st of 1984. It wasn't too long before that, I had gotten a call from a man who was an informant, claimed he was anyway, and said that he had information that there was going to be another kidnapping in Des Moines, Iowa, that it would be the second weekend in August, 1984, that it would be another paperboy, and that it would be on the south side of Des Moines. I made a tape recording of that call and my discussion with him, and I took it to the Des Moines Police Department because that would be their jurisdiction. I lived in West Des Moines. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to talk to me. So then I went to the TV stations, and I played it for them, for the news directors. I said, at least you need to know about this. I've been to the police department. They didn't care to touch it. I'm informing you. This is what the man said. I then went to one of the reporters who was in charge of all those stories on Johnny's case, and I played it for him. His name was Frank Santiago. He still remembers it to this day. Well, August came, and 2020 was in town doing Johnny's story. They were at our home filming. I spoke to the producer, and I told her about this call I had gotten, and that this man had claimed that there was going to be another kidnapping. Jeez. And I said, I just have a gut feeling that he's on the level. I said, I can't explain it. But nobody wants to listen. She made arrangements to stay over in Des Moines one more night. She did not go back to New York after the interviews. The following morning, my phone rang early, and it was a reporter at our ABC affiliate. And he said, the poor kid could hardly talk. He said, Mrs. Gosch, there's been another kidnapping. Just like you said there would be. On the Sunday you said it would be. It's a paper boy. It's on the south side of Des Moines. And they're calling it a kidnapping. And they're bringing in 22 FBI agents from Quantico to handle the case. He said they didn't do any of that for Johnny.
No.
Based on that phone call alone, and this reporter had heard it on the scanners, I called the producer of the 2020 show, who was staying at the Marriott Hotel, woke her up, and I said, it just happened. The second kidnapping just happened.
My gosh.
She called the New York office, and they got a film crew back here, because the film crew had left the night before to another assignment. She got another film crew of their own here. They went charging into the Des Moines Police Department with microphones in their hand, cameras rolling, and put the microphone in the police chief's face and said, are you going to do a canine search for this boy? They didn't for Johnny Gosch. Are you going to do an aerial search by plane or helicopter? They didn't for Johnny Gosch. Are you going to bring in the FBI? They wouldn't for Johnny Gosch.
Oh, my gosh.
And that went on national TV. They have never found the other boy, but there has been a full-scale investigation, more than they ever did for Johnny, for the second boy. I don't know if he's alive or not, but the circumstances were exactly the same. He was kidnapped at precisely the same time of the morning.
Wow.
And to me, that was a message from the kidnappers. We did it because we could.
Yeah, right.
Nobody did anything about the first boy. Now we know we can get away with it in that city.
Jeez, that's
so then we had two kidnappings here.
Yep.
And the press was just raging. National press was in here, everywhere.
And nothing happened to this police chief all these years?
The police chief that we have? Well, he was out of control. He was doing interviews with the newspaper, saying things that, like, he thought we were crazy people for conducting this search and for not letting up on the case, pretty much defaming us. So I thought, what can I do? I decided to call the city council members at home, and I called each one of them on a Friday afternoon at about 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I told them that on Monday morning I was filing a $10 million lawsuit against the city, and I was naming the police chief as negligent.
Good.
Sunday night, they had an emergency meeting of the city council in the basement of the police department, an unpublished meeting, which is against the law anyway. And Monday morning, they announced that the police chief was resigning. At that point, we operated without a police chief for several months, and then they appointed another man who at least did not treat us in the manner that the other one had.
Yeah.
He would make an attempt to follow up on things, or so he said. I still conducted my own private investigation. I would share leads with the police because that way they could never accuse me of not sharing information.
Sure, against the law.
But I continued to just pursue it through my own private means so I would know that it was done, because I could not count on them doing it.
And we're up, Noreen, what, to still 1984?
We have passed through 1984 now with the kidnapping of the second boy. The next couple of years were a lot of dead ends. We did a lot of follow-up. There were still many, many interviews. I flew around the country doing that. We had the Johnny Gosch Foundation started about the second month after Johnny was kidnapped. But in order to be a non-profit 501(c)(3), we had to prove that by the IRS that we were doing something good for other people, and that they had never granted that before to a family or any kind of organization where the child was still missing. They normally had only done it posthumously after the child was dead. So the obvious thing to do was begin to do an education program, something that would give other parents the tools to know what to look for with pedophiles and child molesters. Mm-hmm. Not all pedophiles are kidnappers. Not all pedophiles are murderers, but they do molest kids. So I sought out the people that I could find that knew a lot more about pedophiles than I did.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of studying on this. And we formed a program which was called In Defense of Children. And it would be about an hour-and-a-half program. Parents would come with their children, and I had lots of good reading material for them that I would give, and then we would give a talk, and then we had a film for the kids. Mm-hmm. And I did about 500 of those speeches, which spanned over the next 6-7 years. Traveled all over the country, did lots of TV programs. I've made over 50-some appearances on network shows. With all of that, and because Johnny's case was kept alive, because there was a lot of notoriety about it, it gave the opportunity to do some good. And by that I mean get laws established in states so that we would have more uniformity across the United States. Because previously, each one of our states would operate like a separate little kingdom. You cross out of Iowa into Illinois, and you're operating under a different set of rules.
Sure.
When it came to kidnapped and abused children. By the type of laws that we did get passed, and I testified at the state legislature for many of these laws to drive it home and get the support. The laws would pass one after another, And the first one in each state was called the Johnny Gosch Bill.
Oh, that's neat.
And that was to provide for an immediate investigation.
Yeah.
And I think right now there's probably only 1 or 2 states in the whole country that didn't go along with it. Almost all of them did. Mm-hmm. Then as each missing child came about in this country that received a fair amount of publicity, there were parents that would step forward, and then we've had things like the Amber Alert come about.
Right.
And lots of good that's come from the parents who will stand up and fight. But it was a hard battle. We were the pioneers that started all this.
Why? Because most parents don't want to fight for their kids?
They want to, but they're just browbeaten by the whole thing. They're just taken down from the fact that maybe there's a police chief in their town that's telling them, don't talk to the media, stay home, don't do this, don't do that. The difference with me is I just didn't listen.
Good for you.
That was my son.
You betcha.
And no one was going to tell me I couldn't look for him.
Oh, gosh, Noreen.
And I did not hear the word no when it came to this subject.
Now, were you still married to Johnny's father at this time?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not.
I mean back at this, and what was it? We're 86 now we're up to?
Yes. We were still married at that point. We did not divorce until a little bit later.
Okay.
But the next thing that happened was quite profound. I had, on one afternoon, a call from the police department, which was rare because they didn't call and talk to me very often.
They didn't like you.
They didn't like me. Oh, no. No.
Yeah.
The lieutenant said to me that they had received a phone call from a man who identified himself as one of the families that lives in Des Moines.
Families meaning
and what they're always
mafia.
considered one of the power or control or mafia families.
Okay.
And this man said there's been a contract put out on Noreen. They're going to try to kill her. And they're going to try to lure her out of town. The word is that she's causing too many waves for these people, and they're going to get rid of her. Well, the police lieutenant said, and this was long after Orville Cooney had lost his job. He was no longer in control. It was the new chief.
Yeah.
This lieutenant said, I'm going to call the FBI in on this. So they talked.
Yep.
The next morning at 5 a.m., I got a phone call. And it was a man that I didn't know saying that he wanted me to go to the airport in the afternoon, that there'd be a ticket waiting for me. I was to take one of those planes that, what do they call them?
Shuttle?
Shuttle.
Yeah.
That would take me into Kansas City. Kansas City, I would board an Eastern airliner and go into Oklahoma. There, at the airport, I would land, rent a car, and go to a certain hotel and check in under my own name and wait. And then the man hung up. So I immediately called the police lieutenant, who was helpful to me, told him what happened. He said, we'll be over to your house in a half hour. They all showed up at my house. My husband was out of town. And they proceeded to get into an argument at my kitchen table.
This is all the police, right?
What?
This is all the police, or were the FBI also there?
The FBI did come on that one. The FBI wanted to send me on this trip. The lieutenant said, don't you understand? Someone else called us, and they identified the man, they gave the name. He told us ahead of time that there was a contract on her, that they were going to try to lure her out of the country, out of the city.
Yeah.
And that's when they do it. He said, we cannot send her. We've got to send a policewoman. Well, the FBI said, well, we've got to go back to the office and call Washington. We can't make a decision on this without them. They left, went back to the office. They told me to stay at home, not to go out of the house or to go to work, and not to use my phone.
Yeah.
They gave me a cell phone to use to communicate with them. A couple of hours later, they all came back. The FBI said, if we send an FBI agent with you to pose as your husband. Would you consider going? That means the man would fly with you, share the room with you, everything. The police lieutenant was sitting there, and he pounded the table, and he says, she will never get back here. They will either take her out in Kansas City, because from the shuttle to the airline, she'll have to cross the tarmac.
That's right.
They'll either take her out in Kansas City, or it'll happen in Oklahoma. He said, it'll have to be a policewoman or someone that we can make look like her.
Yeah.
She's not going. So I stayed home, again ordered not to leave my house to make it look like I wasn't there. They sent a policewoman. She went to the hotel just like instructed, and a man called her and wanted her to meet him in a coffee shop. The man surfaced. They were then going to take a drive out into a remote area, and that's where this evidence was supposed to be.
Jeez.
They got the guy, and he went to the penitentiary for 10 years. It was an actual contract. So this was 1988. Now this is critical because in 1988, that is when 80, that's 80, children came forward in Omaha, Nebraska to tell the police, the authorities, the county attorney that they had all been brought into this prostitution ring, pornography ring, and used. There was one boy that they charged with perjury because he named names, and one of the names that he gave was Robert Wadman, the police chief.
Oh my gosh.
So they got rid of him and put him in prison. While he was in prison, he told his attorney that he was in fact in the car the morning of the Johnny Gosch kidnapping, and he helped kidnap Johnny. Well, this was just like unbelievable.
Yeah. And this
that
is
we've
Paul,
gone
right?
so many years
This is Paul.
without information that was solid that we could go to the bank on.
Yeah. And this is Paul who you're going to tell us about.
And that was Paul Benassi.
Wow. Jeez.
And people say, well, what did he want for telling the truth? What did he want out of it? He didn't get anything. He didn't get a parole. He served his full time, and then he was released when that time was up. He did not get anything but a lot of grief for coming forward.
Yeah.
He was able to tell us first and last names of the parties involved. He was able to draw pictures for us. He was quite an artist. He was able to draw pictures of the men. We then went to mug books and found a couple of them. They had prior records. This young man, Benassi, described how they came to Des Moines a few months before Johnny was kidnapped. And they took photographs of him as he walked home from school.
Of Johnny?
Of Johnny.
How did they
And I know that to
him?
be true because at that time, way before the kidnapping, a neighbor saw this. Saw Johnny being photographed, and the car had out-of-state plates on it.
Yeah.
California plates, as a matter of fact. And they leaned out of the car, and it had a big, long telephoto lens, and they were clicking, clicking, clicking as Johnny walked down the street. That woman called the police department to report it.
Yeah.
And the police said, well, we're sorry, but it's not against the law to take pictures of anything. And it's true, it's not. And I cannot fault the police on that one, I really can't. However, a few months later when Johnny was kidnapped, that information became extremely critical. And by then, the woman had thrown away the license plate number.
Oh, no.
Paul Benassi, from his jail cell, described the house that Johnny was standing in front of when he was photographed. And that a man who was in charge of spotting the kids, spotting the ones that they might have as potential victims, was the one who delivered the photographs of Johnny to the kidnappers the night before it took place, to a hotel room. This young boy described every aspect of the kidnapping, how it happened, who was involved, where the van was parked. Do you remember earlier when I said there was a van parked down the block, several blocks away, parked the wrong direction against traffic? This kid in prison even told us that. The color of the van.
How old was Paul at this time?
Paul at that time was about 18.
Okay. Did he ever say?
About 5, 6 years older than Johnny.
Did he ever say, or did you ever find out what it was and why they picked Johnny as with 10,000 other kids in the area? Why Johnny?
Yes, I did. A few years later, Paul Benassi was allowed to file a lawsuit against his perpetrators, who were also the same people involved in Johnny's kidnapping.
Mm-hmm.
And the judge asked Paul Benassi on the witness stand, how did they select Johnny?
Yeah.
Why did they select him? And Benassi looked at the judge and he said, well, they had photographs, and the pedophiles that they supplied kids to picked his picture. They liked his looks. And so that became the kid we were next told to grab. Paul Benassi was able to tell us exactly how much money the kidnappers got for taking Johnny, who bought Johnny. Paul Benassi was the first young man to molest him. We had details. We had more information. You know that phrase, too much information?
Yeah, right.
It was information we needed, but it was at the same time, it was very hard to hear.
Oh, my gosh.
Because that was my son. But we had waited, at that point, we had waited 9.5 years for Benassi to come forward with all this information. Once he did, I thought the police department here would jump on it, that they would go interview him, that they would do something. Do you know what they did?
Nothing.
They said, well, we do not want to reinvent the wheel. Well, I didn't know that wheels had anything to do with this. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, so we're not going to go talk to him. And one of the detectives at the police department, the police department is now full of other men who are all new. All the good old boys have either retired by now or died in this last 20 years. And the new men on the force, they're family men. They've got kids of their own. They wouldn't want to be in my shoes.
Sure.
And they told me that one of the most critical mistakes they ever made on this case was to not go interview Benassi, because that is the key to the case, what this young man was able to tell.
Yeah, I would say so. Now, he was also a kidnapped victim, as I recall.
Yes, he was. And he was sexually abused and used, and then he was forced to help kidnap other kids.
Yeah.
Which is the way they worked. People tell their children, beware of strangers. Don't talk to adults that ask you inappropriate questions or try to get too close to you.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we don't think about warning kids about other kids. And in this instance, they were using a young teenage boy to lure other kids to the car. And that's what Benassi's role was.
Yeah.
Then once remember the man on foot that followed Johnny?
Oh, yeah.
Once they got behind Johnny, the man on foot, they flew open the car door. The man on foot pushed Johnny head first into the car.
Yep.
Benassi was in the back seat, and his job was to chloroform him. Then what they did was transfer his body to this van.
Yep.
And then they all left Des Moines, heading different directions, and they all gathered at an abandoned farmhouse in Sioux City, Iowa. We found the farmhouse. We found it all. And Johnny was kept in that basement for 2 weeks. Bound and gagged. They drugged him a great deal. And that's where the initial sexual abuse started. And they did it on film, took pictures.
Gosh.
Then those pictures were shown to prospective pedophiles who might want to own a child. that they could sell the services of. And that's when Johnny was sold. And I know probably to some of your listeners this sounds like something out of a movie, that this couldn't be happening in America, but it did.
Oh, yeah. How much did they get for kidnapping Johnny?
They got $8,500 for doing the kidnapping.
$8,500. And he
Benassi
sold for how
saw
much?
the transfer of the money.
It's what now?
Benassi saw the transfer of the money.
What did whoever bought Johnny the first time, how much did they pay for him?
How much did they make off of him?
Yeah, right.
A lot. They made a lot off of him during the years they had him. It was in late 1980s that I later learned Johnny and two other boys escaped.
Mm-hmm.
They were in Fargo, North Dakota. They stole a car, and that's how they made their break. One of the boys had been a runaway, a habitual runaway from Milwaukee. His name was Jimmy. Now, his parents didn't bother to look for him because Jimmy had disappeared before but always came back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this one particular time he was grabbed by these people and put into the same ring with Johnny, and that's how he got to know Johnny. When they saw an opportunity to get away, they did seize the moment, and they stole a car. They went to Milwaukee to Jimmy's parents' home. That is where his parents gave them food and shelter.
Right.
And let him stay there for a few days. I have spoken to Jimmy's father after the fact. Then the boys left and went their separate ways. It was after the boys left, it was probably a couple weeks later maybe, Jimmy's father saw a TV show, national TV show about Johnny.
Yeah.
Saw the picture, and that's when he realized that he had had Johnny Gosch in his home. Although Johnny was going by the name of Mark at that time, and his hair had been dyed black. So some features on his face were identical, but it was the color of the hair.
So he was about 20 or 21 at this time.
Exactly.
And
the man called me, and he felt terrible.
Yeah.
He said, if I would have known, I would have called you so that you could have gotten here. Now, people might be wondering, well, if Johnny escaped, why didn't he just come home?
Right.
The people that took these boys, and there were lots of boys all over the country, one of the first things they did is that in addition to the horrible photographs they took of them in being sexually abused, they forced the kids to also commit a felony. Steal something, do something where it would be considered a felony.
Yeah.
They then basically brainwashed the kids, telling them that you are now wanted for a felony charge. There's no way you can ever run from us. You can't hide. You can't go to the police for help. And one of the other things that they did to all of the victims of this particular ring, I'll call it, was brand the children.
That's right, yeah.
They used a branding iron, and they would heat it up, and the kids were branded. Someplace on their body.
Yeah.
A leg, a shoulder, a hip, it didn't matter. It would just be someplace on all of them. And the kids were told that because of that brand, no matter if they tried to change their other physical features or appearance, these people would always be able to find them.
Yeah, and this isn't a tattoo. This is a brand. This is not a tattoo.
No,
this is a brand.
I've seen them. They're burned into the flesh.
Right.
Like a cow.
Yep.
Yeah. The thing that was so remarkable, and many of us sitting in our homes right now would think, well, no, that's just bizarre that they could brainwash these kids and have the kids believe it.
Yep.
But let's remember, the kids that were taken were maybe 10 or 12 years old.
Sure.
They had been ripped away from their families, everything they knew. Their formal education stopped at 10 or 12, and they were in the hands of these kidnappers. And in order to get food or whatever they needed to survive, these kids probably were so
And welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the show tonight. I have to tell you, it's an incredible show. We have such a marvelous mother and marvelous guest with us tonight, Noreen Gosch. Noreen, thanks again for sharing with us. We're not going to finish this tonight. You do understand.
I do know.
You're going to have to come back a couple of times because not only do I want people to know Johnny's story, but then I want to get into who's involved, some of the top names, because it's going to blow people's minds, some of the overall uses that these powers that be are using these boys and girls for. I mean, it's just, it's beyond imagination. But let's keep going with your story. You are going to cover what happened to Johnny's father?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
You are going to cover a little bit more about Johnny's father?
Yes. Would you like to do that in this episode tonight?
I'd like to, yeah, because that's something I was going to go out and look for him myself with a baseball bat.
Well, what I'd like to share is that in 1993 we divorced because he became violent and was just subject to rage over nothing or anything. And no woman should ever remain in a home where she's not physically safe and has been hit and had broken bones. And so I filed for divorce and started out on my own. He has basically withdrawn from the world, any of his own family, disappeared, I don't even know where he's at, and did not help with anything further on Johnny's investigation at all. It's been solely on my shoulders, the financing of it, everything.
Right.
And to keep it going is a long, hard situation. However, I feel that it's important. I don't know that we'll ever round up and get all of the people, but we're trying. Now, in the case of Johnny's father, as we mentioned earlier, Paul Benassi was able to file a lawsuit against the people who took him and used him. The judge asked him to relate on the witness stand everything about the Johnny Gosch case. At that point, the judge ruled that he believed that Benassi was telling the truth. The judge was asking questions as well as the attorney. The judge asked Benassi, how did they know Johnny was going to be alone that morning on the paper route? His father or mother had always gone with him.
Sure, right.
In the past. Benassi, without batting an eye, turned and looked at the judge, and I heard this for the very first time in a courtroom in 1999. Benassi said, prior arrangements were made with Mr. Gosch on the phone about 1:30 in the morning. We called him.
Oh, my God.
And he was told not to go on the route that night, or that next morning. Jeez. That was the signal.
Isn't that unbelievable?
Well, I about fainted in the courtroom.
Oh, gosh.
That was the first that I had heard that. And every single thing that Benassi has ever told us has been proven, confirmed, and is true. I don't have any reason to doubt him on this either.
Yeah.
At this point, there's so much information that needs to be followed up on the case. But I was told by one of the current detectives for the West Des Moines Police Department, he was off duty and he contacted me, and he said, you need to know what you're up against. The police chief now has told us all that we are not to try to help you finish this case or bring it to resolution. That they do not want this case to go any further. And I said, why are you telling me this?
Yeah, because this is the same police department that fought you from day one.
But now we're on our third police chief. And this detective said, you're a good lady. He said, you're very smart. And he said, you've worked very hard. But you need to know you're up against big people here. They're not going to let you be successful. And would anybody like to take a guess as to where the new police chief now came from?
Oh,
He came over here in 1999.
From where? Omaha,
Nebraska Department. He worked under Robert Wadman.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. See, the whole thing is like a giant cobweb.
Yeah.
And the only way to tell this story is on a timeline.
Yeah.
So that you can kind of go in some kind of order, because otherwise it's mind-boggling to try and remember. And when I wrote my book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, I wrote the book in that manner. The first half of the book is all a timeline as things developed.
Right, right.
The second part of the book goes into a little bit of history of how some of these pornography and prostitution rings have gotten a foothold in our country and the methods they use on children, the FBI's role in it, and some pretty intense material. But I wrote the book so that it will be easy to pick up and follow. And I have a website for people who might want to visit it. It's www.johnnygosch.com. And Johnny is spelled Johnnny, and then Gosch is Gosch. On that website, there is a place to order my book, and or they could send a money order or check and order the book directly from me if they're interested. But it gives a great deal of information. There's also a 52-page report from a former FBI agent who has assisted me. He became a private investigator after he retired from the FBI, and he has published his 52-page report on Johnny's case, and that's available for people to read on my website, too. It'll give them some pretty startling ideas about what goes on in this country concerning children. The big mistake that was made, they picked the wrong kid. I just wasn't going to lay down and die. I wasn't going to be silent. And I haven't got my son back, but I at least know what happened to him.
And he's still alive today, the bottom line is, isn't he?
I beg your pardon?
He's still alive today.
He is still alive, yes. And he's only alive because he was able to escape from them and live hand to mouth. And I did learn that right after he escaped, he and a couple of the other boys did go to live on the first one was an Indian reservation in Wisconsin. And from there they moved on to other Indian reservations. And the reason they did that is because you cannot, they're not subject to law enforcement there because they're sovereign states.
That's right.
And the boys already knew they had committed a felony, so in their minds they probably felt they could live, work there, be safe, and then if anybody recognized them or things got too hot, they would just pick up and move to another and another. And so they lived pretty much like a gypsy or a nomad.
Now, Noreen, Johnny escaped from this group in '88, you said?
Yes.
So
about the time that we have pinpointed it.
So he has literally been on the run hiding from these same people since 1988.
Right.
That's 16 years.
That's right.
Jeez.
I had one visit from him in 1997.
And that's it?
Yes, that's just once. I had been on the Lisa Gibbons program.
Right.
And she allowed me to give a message to the public via the media and to speak directly to Johnny if he was watching. And when I did that, I told him I loved him no matter what happened to him, and that I did not live at home anymore, that I had divorced his father, but that I lived in West Des Moines, and my name and address was in the phone book. And he could contact me at any time. 3 months went by, and there was a knock on my door at 2 in the morning, and there stood Johnny out in the hallway. He came in. He stayed for about 2.5 hours. We visited and talked. He had one other young man with him. Johnny confirmed just about all of the things Paul Benassi had told me. Everything that we talked about, he filled in the blanks. And the reason for his visit to me, he had seen the Lisa Gibbons program. He believed me when I said I would do anything to help him. And what he wanted me to do was to do something to get these men arrested. And to promise not to tell that he had been to see me.
Yeah.
Which I did not do. I kept silent for 2 years. And then I was on the witness stand in a courtroom on the Benassi case. And the attorney asked me, in all the time Johnny had been missing, had I ever seen or talked to him in person?
Yeah.
And the attorney was not even prepared for the answer. He had no clue that I had seen Johnny.
That's your attorney.
And I tried to avoid the question, and the judge told me that I had to answer it or I'd be in contempt.
Oh, jeez.
All the records from that court proceeding have been sealed by the judge, by the way. But he did hand down a ruling in favor of Benassi.
Good.
And during that court trial, then, it came out that Johnny had been here. But directly after Johnny had been here, I made an appointment with the county attorney. And I took in the information to him that Johnny shared with me. And I only told him that it came from an informant.
Right.
I did not tell him that the informant was my son.
Yeah.
I could not do that. And it wasn't until a couple of years later when he learned that it was Johnny. And after Judge Urbaum handed down his ruling saying that Benassi was telling the truth, I felt that that would give the county attorney and the authorities here in Des Moines the opportunity to go back and investigate that which they had not before.
Yeah, yeah.
So I met with them, and they said, no, 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 we're not going to accept the federal ruling. Now, it came from a federal judge in a federal courtroom, and they're choosing not to accept it. And I've been told that that is against the law.
Really?
They have to. The problem is enforcing it. I, as a layperson, can't enforce it. I have not found anybody yet who has not in some way been bought on this case, been compromised, or is under somebody's thumb. I certainly can't trust someone in the police department when they won't accept this information either, because I went to them as well.
Yep.
And they said, no, we're not going to go talk to Benassi. No, we're not going to accept the federal ruling. And a gentleman by the name of Jim Rothstein contacted me. He's a former New York police detective. He retired a few years ago, and he's been working on a committee to investigate the trafficking of children in this country. It was his job to call police departments who had cases on file that fit this criteria.
Yeah.
So he called the West Des Moines Police Department. This was some time ago. And spoke with one of the officials there. And he has the name of the person and everything that was said. And he asked, what did you do on the Johnny Gosch case? What did you investigate? How did you investigate? And the representative from the West Des Moines Police told him, well, we basically didn't do much of anything except create a phony composite drawing to show to the public, because we were ordered to stand down the morning of the kidnapping.
This is the FBI.
Well, this was the police,
And,
West Des Moines Police
yeah, okay.
official.
Yep.
So someone gave the order for the police department to stand down. That's why there was no all-points bulletin issued for the car. That's why the FBI was not called in. That's why there was no helicopter searches. That's why there were no canine searches. They shut down because they were ordered to shut down the morning of the kidnapping. And that is why, after the first police officer left our home, after taking the initial missing persons report, and we didn't see any detectives until about 2 in the afternoon, they had to figure out what to do. And they were ordered to stand down. So everything else that appeared on TV or any interviews they did, they were trying to just make it look like they did something on the case, because Jim Rothstein has it verbatim that they were ordered to stand down, and he's willing to testify in court to that effect.
Jeez.
So that tells me that they never did really look for Johnny. And it's a good thing that I started an investigation because nobody else would have.
Incredible.
It just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting parts of the book, too, Noreen, was when, and I don't know if you want to do it now or later, but...
Whatever the time frame you have, I'm fine.
When you got the call from this guy named Bill, and you heard from him over a period of time, for some reason, he just stood out, and I could just feel this guy.
Mm-hmm. I had been struggling for a few months with the earlier mentioned situations with the police department and the lack of help.
Yeah.
And one day, a man walked into my office, and I just named him Bill in my book. He stood in front of my desk and he said, "When you get tired of everything that the police are not doing to help you, call me." And he put his business card down on the desk. Well, I must admit, I was a little surprised. He said, I have ways that I can help you. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I had no clue. And I put the thing in my wallet, and it was a while before I called him. But I finally was just absolutely frustrated and at my wit's end. I didn't know what to do anymore. And I remembered that card, so I called him, and I said, I need some help. I need information. And I started telling him some of the things that were happening. And I don't know who all he was working with, but if I would ask him for information on something on the case, he'd have it back to me the same day.
My gosh.
I'd give the same request to the police, and it might be 2 months.
Now, he was...
If at all.
He was, and I guess it's okay to say because he's not with us anymore.
No, he passed away about a year ago.
He was Mafia, wasn't he?
Beg your pardon?
He was Mafia.
Yeah, he was.
Now, which leads me...
I learned that later. I didn't know it at first.
Really? Okay. But it leads me to believe or understand that they either are totally aware of what's happening and or they may or may not be involved in it. But this man, I guess, out of the goodness of his heart or under the auspices of whoever was above him, he was allowed to help you.
He was allowed to help me through one of the major families that he was associated with, was my understanding. And the reason that he did, he explained to me, he said, they are suspect and accused of, and perhaps maybe even involved in doing a lot of things in this country, but he says, we don't do kids. They don't do kids, is the way he put it.
Jeez.
And he said, I've been authorized to help you with anything that I can. And I said to him, well, I don't have any money I can pay you. I don't have anything I can give you for this assistance.
Right.
And I said, I don't want to even start any exchange like this with you thinking that I can, because I can't. I said, I just need help, and if you want to do it on that basis, that would be wonderful. And I felt when you get down on your knees and you pray for help from God, God doesn't necessarily get too picky about the form it comes in.
I mean, who's going to bring it? Yeah, that's true.
And if someone can come your way that can offer ultimate protection or information to help you save a little boy that was out there, there was something almost mystical about this experience. And I did go into detail about it in the book. Yeah,
you did.
And I was very grateful for the help. And this went on for many years until he became ill with cancer, and he did pass away. But during that time, I could call on him any time for help.
But he wouldn't go get Johnny, even though they knew where he was all the time.
Right.
Strange. Right. Very strange.
Because, they knew where he was. They could find him for me.
Noreen, have you ever found out why your ex-husband did what he did?
We don't know the answers to that. The only thing that we've been able to pinpoint, and this came from two witnesses, the man that Paul Benassi sued was named Larry King. He was not the Larry King on TV on CNN, so let's straighten that out right away.
He was a great big black guy, so
he was a big black guy.
Yeah.
And he was the head of the Franklin Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska.
Right.
And it was basically a money laundering situation. And they were laundering money for lots of concerns. One of them was NAMBLA. NAMBLA had placed hundreds of thousands of dollars through the Franklin Credit Union. And NAMBLA stood for North American Man-Boy Love Association. They advocated sex between men and little boys. And this Larry King was implicated in this whole snafu scandal that blew up in Nebraska. When Paul Benassi sued him and won, Benassi never received any money yet, but he was given, through the judge, awarded $1 million for his damages.
And this was how long ago, that trial?
And this was in 1999. And King was still in prison.
Yeah.
King got out of prison in April 11th, 2001, and he went straight from his prison in Colorado to a job that was waiting for him in Washington, D.C., with somewhere with the Republican Party. And there's a great deal about King in my book, and how he functioned in Nebraska, and how he functioned in Washington, even to the point of having a house that he rented on Embassy Row, and throwing a lot of parties for dignitaries, senators, whatnot. And then after the party, the straight party, there would be a party after the party, and all of the people who were just normal, decent guys went home, and the ones who were into using children stayed. And that's when they rolled out the cocaine and all of this kind of drugs, anything they wanted, booze, and they brought kids in for abuse. Now, what I'm leading up to is there was a man by the name of Rusty Nelson. He was hired by King, and Rusty Nelson happens to be a very talented photographer. His job was to get pictures, incriminating pictures of any VIP with a child doing something inappropriate. Then that VIP would be blackmailed for whatever reason. Rusty Nelson was also in that courtroom in 1999 testifying. A picture of my ex-husband was shown to Rusty Nelson.
Hang on, everybody. That was interesting. Let me play music. Be right back. I'll get Maureen again. Everybody, this is very strange. I can't listen to this. This is what's coming over this line. Somebody has broken into my line, so I can't get to Noreen again. Darwin, if you're there, call Noreen and tell her I'm trying to get through, but somebody has screwed up my telephone line. But I'll try. Just call her if you can, and I will try also. I hope you have her number up there. Okay. I do have my
I can tell there's something you don't
Oh,
want
no.
to
So I'm going to put you right
tell
on,
me.
Noreen, and we will, let's,
I've never
Oh,
had that happen before.
okay, no, and, interesting, Noreen, every once in a while, depending on what we're talking about, we have very strange things that go on here because we have
I'm glad you told me, because I thought maybe something was wrong with my phone.
no, we have a tendency to expose people, and they don't like it. But please
And that's
go
probably
on.
well known.
Yeah, Rusty was shown a picture of your husband, but this was in Washington, D.C. He was shown the picture?
No, he was shown a picture of my ex-husband in Lincoln, Nebraska,
Okay.
following the court case where Paul Benassi filed suit against Larry King.
Yes, okay.
And there was no name attached to the photograph. It was just a photograph.
Right.
When Rusty Nelson looked at it, he was asked, "Do you know who this man is?" And Rusty Nelson said, "Well, I've seen him before." He said, "The first time I ever met him, he was in Larry King's office."
Oh, my gosh.
And see, those are the kind of pieces we have.
Ooh.
We know that John Gosch was in Larry King's office prior to the kidnapping.
Yeah.
We know that he was at parties at a place called the Mark in Omaha, Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where King hung out and was picking up the local boys that they were using for prostitution.
Jeez.
And the reason I know that for a fact, there was a young man that I worked with here in Des Moines some years later.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that we were just both hired by the same company. And he kept looking at me, and I had occasion to have to go to the stockroom to get something. And he followed me in there, and he said, "Could I talk to you for a few minutes?" He explained that he lived in Nebraska, Omaha,
Yeah.
and that when he was a young man in his late teens, he would go to this club called the Mark. And that is where Larry King first approached him and wanted him to pose for pictures and be involved in this prostitution. Now, those were the willing subjects that they would get. They later went on, or at different times they went on to abduct kids, but they also were picking up local kids to do this.
Yeah.
And the Mark was one place where it was quite well known. And John Gosch was seen there many times and identified by both Benassi and Rusty Nelson.
Now, what
And
was
all of this
what was he
information-
doing there? I mean,
I beg your pardon?
what was he doing there? Was this
Well,
known?
that's a good question. I don't know.
Well, was this a club known where men could pick up little boys, or what?
Little boys, girls. Mm-hmm.
Oh God! What about Noreen? When
There's a lot of pieces about this that I don't have.
yeah,
And then, like I said, all of a sudden, when all this surfaced
right.
about Benassi and his trial, John Gosch picked up and left Des Moines, and I have no idea where he's at.
Oh, is that right? So he's gone now.
He's gone.
Because one of the other strange things, which is bizarre, like everything else, was that you met certain people, whether police chief or FBI or even some politicos, who said, "Oh yeah, we've met before."
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. When Paul Benassi first surfaced in 1988, his attorney, John DeCamp, called our home to tell us that his client had confessed. I was not home that night. I was working. My ex-husband, he was my husband at the time, took the phone call, but did not tell me about it. He then went over to Nebraska and went out to the prison with John DeCamp, unbeknownst to me. He kept that secret for over a year and a half. Then it broke in the news that Paul Benassi had confessed to the Gosch case. It was kept quite hush-hush at first. It wasn't until much, much later, 1997 to be exact, I had occasion to meet John DeCamp for the very first time. 2020 had called, and they wanted to do an update of Johnny's story, to do the final ending of the story. And they flew a film crew out here, and we were all going to go over to John DeCamp's office to meet and talk. When we walked in, John DeCamp extended his hand, very friendly, shook my hand, and said, "Oh, Noreen, it's so good to see you again." And I looked at him and I said, "John, I've never met you before. I've never been here before." He said, "Oh, yes, you have. You came over here in 1988 with your husband, and we went out to the prison to interview Benassi." I said, "No, I didn't learn about Benassi until sometime later. John kept it from me." So then John DeCamp brought his office manager into the room, and he said, "Jan, didn't John Gosch come over here in 1988? And didn't he bring his wife? And didn't we go out to, and didn't he bring this woman and introduce her as his wife? And didn't we go out to the prison?" Jan said, "Yes, he did. Yes, you went out to the prison, but it wasn't this woman.
Wow.
It was a different woman."
Jeez.
Since that time, I have encountered 25 people who all met this other person, and they made her look fairly like me with hairstyle and whatnot. And if you have the husband introducing the person as the wife, who would doubt him?
But who's they? You said they made her look a lot like you. Who is they?
Well, John and whoever else helped him. I'm sure he didn't do it alone.
Yeah.
The shock of it all was I finally did track it down. There was a news article about me in the Omaha World Herald sometime after that. And I got a phone call from a woman who said, "Did you know that there's a woman here, or used to live here in Nebraska, who's a dead ringer for you, and that she used to work as a private investigator?" I said, "Oh, really?" And she gave me the woman's name, and we tracked everything down, did the right investigation. Turns out she was the one posing as me.
What connection did she have with John?
John DeCamp helped me run that all down because he had friends in the Attorney General's office. And they even got photographs of her for me. And then later, when I wrote my book and published the book, I put a picture of her and Johnny in the book together.
I have that, yes.
And I was called later and told that after she learned that her picture was in my book, I did not name her. And the reason I didn't is because there might at some point be charges filed for something that I don't know yet at this moment. And so I can't release her name for that reason. But after she learned that her face was in my book, she had a stroke.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you ever find out what her connection with John was?
She knew they had a mutual person that they knew who was working as a private investigator. And he arranged for this woman to pose as me and go out to the prison. And Benassi told me later that, you see, when I went to the prison a couple of years later, I thought he looked at me kind of strange. And he told me that, he said, the first time that I was at the prison with John Gosch wouldn't let me speak. Well, see, it wasn't me. It was
Noreen.
That was posing as me.
Yeah.
And as we talk about some of this, I'm sure for the listeners it's getting a little convoluted and maybe confusing. It is laid out pretty well in the book so that it's understandable. For some reason, John Gosch did not want me to meet Benassi right away. And did not mention it to me. No one mentioned it to me. It was kept under wraps. But then when it exploded in the news and Benassi's existence became known, and I heard about it, then of course they had to bring me over there to meet him and to question him. And when they did that, Benassi I remember he had this very confused look on his face. And then some years later when we met again, after he was out of prison, Benassi said to me, "You know, you two looked alike, looked very similar, but yet there were differences." And he said, "I was so confused when you came to the prison the second time." He says, "Do you remember how I kept looking at you?" like I had seen you before.
Yeah, right.
And that's what it was, yeah. And then countless places that I have been.
Huh.
I'll encounter somebody that thought that they were dealing with me back at that time. Benassi was examined by Dr. Judy Ann Denson Gerber, who is one of the top people in the country on multiple personalities, which is what Paul Benassi was diagnosed as having.
Yeah.
And that's very common amongst abused children. Their personalities split off into other personalities after they've been abused. And let's say they create a personality named Jack or Bill or some other name, and then that personality is the one that houses the information for that abuse situation.
Okay.
It helps keeps them from actually losing their mind, right?
Yeah, and going totally insane, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Gerber, I had occasion to talk with her on the phone when I was writing my book,
Yeah.
because she had examined Benassi, and I was interested in her findings. So I called her, talked with her for some time on the phone, and at the end of the conversation, I said to her, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, and I hope one day that we can meet in person. And there was this pause, and she said, my dear, we met clear back in 1988.
Oh, my gosh.
You were in the courtroom when Benassi gave his deposition.
Unbelievable.
You were there with your husband. You sat through the whole thing. We sat in the same bench together. It wasn't me. I wasn't ever there. So you see, they went to some extent to portray someone else's me.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And see, and they got away with it only because the Des Moines press never carried the story. Had the Des Moines press carried the story at all about the Franklin cover-up to any great detail, there might have been pictures of the two of them or something, but there wasn't.
Incredible. Incredible.
See? And they got away with it for a couple of years.
Where is Paul Benassi now?
Paul Benassi lives in Omaha area now, and he's married, has 2 little children, and
Really?
trying to make a life, for his family. And he's turned out to be of great help to me, extremely great help. And it's interesting, the last time I saw him and his wife, I have since remarried. My husband and I were over in Omaha to meet with him on some issues that had come up concerning Johnny and the case.
Yeah.
And when I walked in, Benassi and his wife came running over and just put their arms around me and my husband and said, we just love you guys.
Isn't that incredible?
Now, for most people to even hear that he was one of the ones that helped kidnap Johnny, they would wonder how on the earth could she stand there and let this kid give her a hug and say, we just think the world of you guys. Well, I had to do a lot of forgiving.
Oh, yeah.
In my mind and in my heart. I also had to really center in on the fact that Benassi was forced to do this because he was a victim too.
Yeah.
He didn't opt to do it just because that's what he wanted to do one weekend.
Right.
He was kidnapped and sexually abused also. And then in order to, and when he first started molesting Johnny, they were holding a gun on him, that if he didn't do it, they would shoot him. That was the threat. Whether they would have shot him or not, I don't know, but that was the threat, and he believed it. So I had to get past all of that.
Right, yeah.
In order to meet with him and not show anger or hatred to the boy. And when you look at him, after all he's been through, he's doing the best he can right now.
He's got to be, what, in his early 40s?
He is now, yes.
Yeah.
And they've got 2 darling little girls, and they're just trying to make a family and a happier life in spite of what happened. And I do have to hand it to his wife. She's a very understanding, loving, kind person, and that would be a load for a young wife.
Oh, yeah.
When she was in court with us, when Benassi was sharing all of this, for the judge, She was hearing some of it for the first time. She didn't know the full extent of everything.
And she was married to him at that time?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, she is a good girl.
And see, that was just a part of his life that he wanted to forget.
Yeah.
Well, then when he was brought into court and this whole case appeared, a lot of things came out in court that I think he didn't anticipate coming out.
Right.
And that's when his wife learned the rest of it. And I will have to say, she was a trooper.
Have his personalities merged into a single one yet?
Once in a while, he'll have a jump into a personality. And the last time we were together, and there was a great deal of extensive conversation, he jumped personalities 3 times. And only if you're around him enough and recognize the dialect and the changes would you even know. A lot of times a person wouldn't even know. But the night that we had our last conversation with him, we were in a restaurant, clear back in a corner.
Mm-hmm.
2 men came in and sat in a booth and positioned themselves and kept staring at Benassi and making gestures with their hands. Terrified him.
Really?
They still watch Benassi.
God, unbelievable.
There are people that were involved that I guess want to make sure that he doesn't say too much more.
Is he the one, Noreen, that started to, or was it Rusty, who started to talk about some of the well-known political figures who were involved in all this? Like the thing that, I found interesting is Bob Kerrey, who's now senator from Nebraska, was one of the people involved.
Mm-hmm. Benassi mentioned some of them, but Rusty confirmed it on the witness stand by telling the judge that there were photographs of these men with kids and that they were very damaging photographs. And there was a private detective hired by the Nebraska State Legislature. Mm-hmm. His name was Gary Caradori. Gary got a call, and he had been investigating all of this with all these kids coming forward for some time. Interviewed Benassi and whatnot.
Yeah.
Gary got a call to meet Rusty Nelson, who had been in hiding ever since the Franklin Credit Union broke.
Right.
Got a call to meet him in Chicago. Gary was a pilot. He had his own plane.
Oh, boy.
He told his wife before he left on that trip, I know what happened to Johnny Gosch now. When I get back from Chicago, I'm calling his parents. He got on the plane, took his son with him under the guise of going to a Chicago Cubs game. They flew into Chicago. At the game, he met Rusty. That's where Rusty exchanged all the photographs, the incriminating photographs of these VIPs.
Yeah.
Gary then got on the plane. He called Senator Lauren Schmidt by phone and said, I will be back in Nebraska by morning. I will be in court. I've got it. I've got it, and we're going to nail them. Gary got on his plane, took off, and over the state of Illinois, his plane exploded in the air and fell to the ground in a field. Now, do you know that by that point, Robert Wadman had left Nebraska? He was no longer police chief.
Yeah.
He was now in law enforcement and was a police chief in the county where Gary's plane went down. A farmer saw the wreckage and went out there to the field.
Yeah.
On the field, amongst the burning plane, was debris all over. He began picking up photographs, one after another, of basically porn photographs with kids and adult men who happened to be very important persons. The FBI showed up, seized all the pictures, told the man to get out of the field and not to speak of this again. They then loaded the wreckage of Gary's plane onto a flatbed and hauled it to a military base. Now, they do not normally haul wreckage of private planes to a military base for any reason.
They sure don't.
Gary's wife received a phone call that his plane went down and that he was dead. By the next morning, the FBI showed up at his office and ransacked the office for any records, taking anything they wanted.
Yeah.
Gary did have the answer as to what happened to Johnny, and he was on his way back to testify in court the next morning, and he was silenced.
So this is still going on? I mean, they'll stop at nothing.
We've had many deaths in this case. The most recent one was a young man who was also one of the kids that came forward. He disappeared. He recanted his story and then went back on the witness stand to reiterate that he was telling the truth. A similar story as Panassi. He disappeared.
Jeez.
Nobody knew where he went. Just kind of got out of Dodge, so to speak.
Yeah.
It'll be probably last summer is when it happened. I got up one morning, checked my email, and there's an email from somebody I didn't know with a small little paragraph saying, "I thought you should know Troy Bonner is dead." And I had no clue who it was from. They didn't sign it.
Yeah.
So I called John DeCamp right away, and I said, "I just got this email saying Troy Bonner is dead." He said, "Well, write back and ask him for details." So I wanted to have John tell me what he wanted to know. So I wrote back for details. Apparently, Troy was brought into a medical facility, and this was in Abilene, Texas. Brought into a medical facility because of some injury to his leg or something. He was kept there overnight, and the next morning, and there was no drugs on his person, in his clothing, pockets, or anything.
Yeah.
And he came in without any luggage. The next morning, the nurses went in to check on him, and he was sitting straight up in bed with his mouth full of blood, dead.
Jeez. Unbelievable.
The toxicology reports say that it was an overdose. We sent detectives down there, and the best that we can figure is that someone got into the room and silenced him.
Sure.
Now, one would say, well, what would make you take that leap? The month before, there had been a reporter for a national magazine staying in Nebraska, revamping the Franklin case and the Johnny Gosch case, interviewing everybody connected that was still alive. The only person this reporter could not find was Troy Bonner. And Troy was one of the key witnesses. And he asked all over town, does anybody know where Troy is, trying to track him down. The reporter finally finished up his work and left. 1 week later, Troy's dead in Texas.
Yep.
Someone wanted to make sure that Troy never talked to the reporter, I believe. And I'm not the only one that shares that opinion.
Well, Noreen, do you feel safe, or do you feel constantly threatened also?
I don't feel constantly threatened. One of the most recent things that happened earlier this year, a few months ago, a reporter a talk show host from Omaha, Nebraska called and asked if he could do an interview, kind of an update of Johnny's story.
Yeah.
And he'd interviewed me 5 times before. We did one every year. It was like an anniversary story. But I shared some things in that interview that I didn't know before. And one of them was the information about the police chief and the information that the police department was told to stand down. I had never aired that publicly before. The very next day, the show host was fired. He was told by the owners of the station, and he'd been in good standing there. He worked there 9 years. He was told that it was because of my interview.
Incredible.
Marty Stacy was his name. The very next day, I heard a noise out in the hallway where I live.
Yeah.
My husband had gone to work about 7:30 in the morning, and I was leaving about 10 to go. I opened the front door, and there lying on the floor in front of my door was a full-size, rubber, anatomically correct female sex doll with dark hair and a hole blown in her head. Well, I called John DeCamp right away, and I called a few other people that were privy to what had happened to Marty Stacy, and they told me to file a police report right away, just to get it on record, so there's a paper trail. So I called police, and when I told them about the radio interview and that the show host was fired just a few hours before I got this doll delivered, they took it as an implied threat, the same type of thing that would have happened to Troy, only just a little bit different technique, and that it was definitely related to that Omaha interview.
Noreen, believe it or not, we're out of time.
I'm not surprised.
Will you be available next week?
Yes, I can next week.
Tell me your best day right now.
What night is... Let's see here.
How about Wednesday night?
What time on Wednesday?
Same time. 8:30 your time, 7:30 my time.
Okay. I teach a class on Wednesday nights, and I will barrel right home from the class, but I might be just a few minutes late getting in the door.
Maybe I can change stuff around. How about Tuesday?
Maybe if you could just fill 15 minutes or so, then I could be on after that.
How about Tuesday? Is that better?
Tuesday, I would be home by 8:30. I teach a class that night, too, but it's an earlier class, so I would be home. Tuesday and Wednesday nights I teach.
Okay, let's do it Tuesday.
And Tuesday is an earlier class, so I'd be home by then.
You got it. Let's do it Tuesday night.
I will plan on Tuesday night.
Yeah, because I want to...
I thank you very much.
No, I thank you too, Noreen.
For allowing me to tell the story and the details of it, because there is so much involved in this case.
Yeah.
It wasn't a random kidnapping, and it wasn't a lone pedophile that did it.
Right.
It was organized.
It sure was. God bless, and do take care, and I will see you next Tuesday night. Thank you, and I'll email you the information. Great. That you asked for. Okay, thanks, Noreen. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. I know we went over a little bit, everybody, but I got to do it, and this is, you've got to hear all the pieces. It is not pleasant, but it's one of the most important stories that we are ever going to hear, because unless we clear up what is happening in our world, we are lost. If you didn't realize it, and I'm telling you now, most of what is behind all of these kidnappings and murders is Satanism. Thanks for listening, everybody. God bless us all. We have a very important show tomorrow night, too. We have a show where you're going to know more about Mike Riconosciuto, the young man who I keep saying is the smartest person I've ever met in the world. His cousin's going to be on with us. Anita also has a talk show up in Vancouver, British Columbia. She's been on before. We'll be on tomorrow night. We're getting into some heavy stuff, everybody. Be careful. God bless us all. And I love you. Just take care. Good night, everyone.